Hello, everybody, and thank you for tuning in to the Liberty Report. Today is the day we do Mythbusters, and the co-host for this program is Chris Rosini. And Chris, good to be with you today. Thank you for joining us. Well, good. I guess we have a few things to go over. Maybe we'll address some of the subjects of the election, because nobody talks about the election. Why don't we talk more about the election? I think we're going to be like everybody else. When are we going to get rid of this election? Then there'll be the post-election debates going on. But what do you have today for our program?
Yes, the sooner the better with this election that it gets over with. We're going to look a little deeper into the election. A lot of emotions run high around this time. So we'll first start off with the concept of democracy itself. America is known as an exceptional nation with freedom and democracy, and supposedly has this special dispensation to export that democracy to the rest of the world. However, that's not how America was set up. The founders did not like democracy, so please talk about that, as well as the Electoral College.
Yes, if you look at the Constitution, it doesn't talk about democracy. The word doesn't even appear. And they do talk about liberty. The founders knew about liberty, but not too many people talk about that. And if you look at the campaign this year, there hasn't been an emphasis on the need for liberty. There's always, how are we going to tinker with the government in economics and foreign policy and political correctness. They're always interested in something much bigger for the government. Of course, what they will do is they will try to follow the dictates of the majority. So when you have majoritarianism or pure democracy, then you want the majority to dictate to the politicians on what to do, which is an incentive for all the special interests to get together and divvy up all the loot and the wealth and all the rules and regulations, and they become very, very authoritarian. One of the results of a democratic process, when you get overemphasis or false emphasis on a pure democracy, you end up with chaos in the political system. And all you have to do is look around today. If the people are wondering what's going on, well, maybe it's this purity of thought about democracy solving all our problems is one of the reasons we have this democratic mess involved in the process that we're facing today. So the other thing that happens in pure democracy, when the majority gets control and can abuse the minority, especially the producing minority in a society, you end up with debt, and you end up with a poorer country, and you end up with a smaller middle class. And that's exactly where we are. So it is the so-called excesses of the democratic process right now that is giving this trouble. Does that mean we shouldn't have elections? No. The democratic process, in a limited sense of picking leaders, should be one thing. But the founders never thought of this, that you would be having the democratic process dictate political correctness and cultural issues and all these things at the federal level. And that was supposed to either be done by individuals or local groups or local governments, but never meant to be something that the federal government would be involved in. So democracy was not what they thought. And a good evidence for this is the way they set up the Electoral College. The Electoral College, they say, people who argue, this is terrible, this is not right. And, you can actually not win the presidency and have the popular vote. Well, on the surface it's saying, well, that doesn't seem fair unless you get to thinking, if you had about 5 major states that are very, very densely populated, if you could control and manipulate and rig elections, those 5 states could rule out the representation of a bunch of other ones, maybe 20 or 25 of the other states, because they're so small. So that's why they had an electoral college. Of course, they were more idealistic, and they were hoping that an electoral college would be done in a deliberate fashion where the states would send electors, individuals who were respected in the community and knew about what the Constitution said, and they would get together and choose the candidates for the presidency. So that is one thing. But the other thing they did to try to nullify this whole idea of pure democracy is they decided that, the small states, a state like Wyoming and others very small states, they would have 2 senators just like Texas. Well, you know, that cheats us here in Texas. And of course, when Texas came into the Union, they were trying to protect themselves, so they had a protective clause in there. They said, well, if necessary, we want the right to divide ourselves into 5 states, and then we would have 10 senators instead. But of course, that's not going to happen, even though at times it sounds like a pretty good idea. But the democratic process of saying that small states would have representation was very much on the minds of the founders. But today we have this incessant chant about spreading democracy, American exceptionalism. And we go about the world with our guns and bombs and bullets and financial intimidation and freezing of assets and sanctions on people and say, you do it our way. You have elections and elect your people like we do. Of course, we never have any interference in our elections. We just believe in interfering in other people's elections. So we have been very much involved in elections overseas for a lot of years. I know since 1953 especially, we've been very much involved. So why would people be surprised if we have interference in these elections here? But anyway, we insist on this democracy in other countries. And a few of them, have gone along. They listened to our pressure because we said, if you do it, we'll give you a lot of money. If you don't do it, we're liable to bomb you to kingdom come. So they go along with it and have an election. And our CIA tries to prop it up. Just recently we had Hillary dictating, we got to find out who we are before the election, who we stand, so that we can pick that person. And it is so blatant. This is the wonderful thing about WikiLeaks. They are allowing people to see how these people operate, behind the scenes. But if what are these countries that we invade and occupy and teach them about American democracy, and they finally have an election? Well, if they don't elect the right person, we get rid of them. We have another coup. If we have a democratic elected leader like we had in Ukraine, and we didn't like him, we participated in a coup and put Poroshenko in. And that's the way we have operated. So it is a farce about us being, the great Democrats, and shortcomings of democracy should be recognized as well. But one thing for certain, that the system that we have of exporting our democracy and demanding people live like we do, it causes a lot of resentment. And if anybody is fearful that the world is becoming more violent and it's more difficult to travel around the world, they should consider seriously, what we're doing in our foreign policy and our relationship and understanding what democracy is all about, and maybe challenge it like the founders did and say, that's not what we want. We want representative government. We want a Republican form of government. We don't want the dictatorship of the majority, which is what pure democracy is all about.
Yeah, next, there's a concept that's so foreign to us, but there was a time where the president was actually approachable by the average American, because constitutionally, the president wasn't supposed to have a exceptionally powerful position. So different today, where the president is like a Caesar who is tightly guarded and roams around the land doling out warfare and welfare. So, Dr. Paul, please talk about the Federal Reserve's role in creating this Caesar-like president that we have today.
Well, all of big government is dependent on the Federal Reserve, and certainly the president is dependent on it, but the spending of Congress is dependent on it too. But the Federal Reserve can work in collaboration with a president. They claim that the Federal Reserve is independent. No, it's not independent. It's secret because we're not allowed to know what's going on. And the presidents collude, with the Federal Reserve, and they pretend that doesn't happen, but they very much accommodate, the incumbent president. So when that happens, things get out of control. So the Fed is a facilitator. Let's say the Congress isn't moving fast enough to raise taxes. Fed says, don't worry about it. We will print the money and dilute the value of the money, and that'll serve as a tax because only the middle class will suffer from the increase in the money supply, the inflation, and the government will benefit by it because they get to pass this money out. And they say, well, that is a form of taxation as well, yeah. So we can take the pressure off the president and the Congress to raise taxes because the Federal Reserve is there. But a central banking system is something that enhances the power of the executive branch in particular. And you shouldn't have to say this because it sounds like conspiracy, but the Communist Manifesto listed central banking as one of the key issues on what they needed to, organize and to maintain a dictatorial government like the Soviets had. So central banking is a key element for those who are in power and want to wield power, and unfortunately, they've gotten away with it for a long time, but the nice thing about it, less so now, because it wasn't secret and they did things behind the scenes. But because of the work that Campaign for Liberty has done in trying to expose the Federal Reserve, we've actually had votes in the Congress. We win the votes and say that we want more transparency and we want to audit the Fed. And the next step, of course, is that when this whole thing comes down on our head, both financially, monetarily, and for the foreign policy, that we have to demand a correction that is so necessary, and that is the repeal of the Federal Reserve Act. That is, get rid of central banking. And people are talking about the alternative currencies. Usually they're talking about another fiat currency, but there are others in Asia, and including China and others, talking about a currency that would have some type of relationship to gold. So the Fed is powerful. They remain powerful. They have been good friends of the presidents, and they've accommodated them. But things are changing quickly now, and this will change. And the more understanding the people have about how central banking and inflationism works, the better off it'll be. Because once the people understand this, they will demand it. They won't just put up with it if somebody comes along and does it. They will demand honesty and money. And we're approaching that time, and I think we should be optimistic about that.
Yes, next, every 4 years, and this year is no exception, many Americans get all excited, get emotionally involved in getting their candidate to win. It's all about their candidate, and they get really into it. Spouses argue, families argue, but is it really their candidate? There happens to be what is called a shadow government of bureaucrats and powerful special interests that are always around no matter which president comes and goes. So, Dr. Paul, please talk about what is known as the deep state.
Yes, and it's been around. I think it's been traditional probably for centuries, if not longer. There's always somebody behind the scenes manipulating government. But most people in this country, up until just recently, didn't dream that they could be very powerful in this country. But more so than ever, the people are becoming more skeptical about trusting the government, believing in the government. There was a time when it was almost treasonous to suggest that the assassination of Kennedy was some type of a conspiracy more than just one disgruntled individual that did it. Now 80% of the American people basically don't believe the commission. Same way with 9/11 commission. Just recently we finally got those 28 pages released trying to find out the truth. So governments don't tell us the truth, but who runs things? Well, the president runs things, they say. Yes, in some ways, but he's more or less, if he's successful in getting in office and successful in staying in office, he usually has to be very accommodating to the deep state. And the deep state is not a total monolith, but they do know how to talk to each other and coordinate things. But it's made up of various groups of people. Like the military-industrial complex is a major issue. We just talked a little bit about the Federal Reserve. Financial industries and banking and the Federal Reserve, that is a big issue and control. And they can dictate, and they usually get to pick their candidate for president. It's more confusing now because some people are arguing the case that Trump is not part of that and he won't have any part of it. Well, there's some hints of that. There's hope that is true, but I'm a bit cynical about what's happened the last 50 years or so, that I've heard good promises by a lot of them, but it ends up that there's a cooperation with the establishment. Take, for instance, where Trump has some good things to say about foreign policy and say, boy, I hope this is true. He wants to massively increase our withering away military. we have to do this. Well, I don't buy into that. We don't need all this money to defend ourselves. Who's going to invade us? And just the other day we had talked about ISIS from a real expert, and he says ISIS actually turns out to be a paper tiger. So yes, there's concerns about it, but changing our foreign policy would take care of this. But nevertheless, the deep state is out there. The media is involved in that. That's why, all the stations preach interventionist foreign policy. They preach war, and they're not ever holding the feet to the fire of the presidents who go to war without a declaration. So it is constant. But once again, the failure of the current system and the end of an era of internationalism, international meddling in other affairs, the entangling alliances, the end of the era of central banking, the fiat economic system, it's all coming to the end. The American people know this campaign that's going on. People know there's something rotten in Washington, and they're trying to do something about it. And they're so frustrated because they're seeing the end stages of what did this democracy, what did all this intervention create? It created this chaos, a bankrupt nation, bankrupt in a moral sense, and a monetary system that's not working very, very well, and a cultural Marxism that's marching on, and people are very frustrated. The frustration is very good, and like I just mentioned, I think it's delightful that we have somebody telling us a little bit about what's going on behind the scenes. And there's so much out there because of the work that WikiLeaks has done that it'll take a while for it to be digested. I imagine it will have some influence on the election, but the most influence will be over time. People will be reading this and realizing how much dirty dealing has been going on and how much deception has been going on and how much pretense these elections have been. So in this way, I think it's looking good that the deep state is becoming known. And they're not elected, obviously. And just since they've had so much to say about election, that's why things seem to never change. The foreign policies have changed, the economic policies have changed. There's nobody challenging the debt. There's nobody challenging the Federal Reserve monetizing debt. They've never challenged, the very, not to a large degree, the very existence of the Federal Reserve. But that is all coming, and the people are waking up. And so I am just hoping as this chaos develops that the message of liberty and the message of free markets is developed and prevalent enough that the American people will know exactly what they want and expect from their politicians.
Finally, Dr. Paul, no matter who wins this election, there will be an inauguration day, and the winner will stand in front of many, many people and many people watching, and they'll put one hand on the Bible and raise the other hand and swear to uphold the U.S. Constitution. Now, I like to call that every president's first official lie because they all break the Constitution immediately. But what if they didn't? What would our country look like if the president actually was a constitutional president? Please describe that for us.
Well, the real tragedy is if you could wave a wand and have a constitutional president that would act according to the Constitution, he'd have to veto just about everything, So it is important that we someday have a constitutional president, but it's also very important that someday the American people are alive and well and understand what the president is doing, because without support and an ability to combat and compete with the deep state, the president just, it won't happen. But it is true, the president is somebody that gets up there, they take an oath of office, and it's a mixed bag. I don't think they have any intention of all of a sudden looking, I better look and see what Article 1, Section 8 says. These are the things I'm allowed to do. No, they've been taught. There's a bit of education that is involved here where they literally convince themselves that this is not really a lie, because they're taught that they can do anything they want as long as it's not strictly prohibited by the Constitution, which means they can do just about everything because the Constitution was written to prohibit certain things. So the presidents tell lies. They tell noble lies because it's the protection of the state. And people, we had a president once said, well, if the president does it, it's legal. Well, that's sort of what goes on, unfortunately. So it is going to be a requirement for the attitude of the people to change so that we can hold the feet to the fire, but actually put the right kind of people in office. But right now, I wouldn't hold our breath because we have a ways to go. But we should be alert to what they're telling us, and all these promises, especially in campaigns, that, this is what I'm going to do, and I am the peace candidate, I'm going to bring about peace, and the president that has the Nobel Peace Prize and goes off and starts a couple new wars. I mean, that is so cynical. But on a constitutional president, this is what he would work for. Free markets, limitation of government regulation and power, sound money, and also deferring to the states for many things. On a very rare basis, they would free up, interstate commerce, not regulate interstate commerce. The Constitution was designed to make sure the commerce was free among the states, and yet today they use that to regulate anything they want, anything manufactured that goes back and forth through the state. So, a real free trade zone within the states would be one of the things to strive for. But the president, he would be vetoing. He would strive and hopefully be able to reach and get a consensus and have a balanced budget. But important, balancing the budget alone is not it. If you raise taxes, balanced budget by spending less. Those are the kind of things that we can dream about and work for, and hopefully we will see that in the near future. So, Chris, I want to thank you for being with us today.
Thank you again, Dr. Paul.
Oh, very good. And I want to thank our viewers for tuning in for Mythbusters, and please come back soon.